Hello, people from around the universe. I am your host, the Italian Ace, and welcome back to another Fairy Tale 100 Years Quest video. And this one will be talking about the new guild that was introduced in these first 9 volumes, and that is the Diabolos Guild. And I probably should have covered this in my volumes 1 through 3 review, but I didn't because, well, 1, it was getting pretty long, and 2, I kind of forgot until after I started recording, and then I was like, it's fine, I'll just make a separate video for it. So, here we are. Anyway, this video will have spoilers because, well, if I'm going to talk about the details of this guild, I can't do so without going into spoilers. So this is your warning, but if you've already read the first 9 volumes of the manga, or if you're okay with being spoiled about this particular topic, then by all means, stick around, because it'll be a good time. And now, I think it's time to get to the actual topic of this video. But of course, before we do that, cue my intro. So what is the Diablos Guild? Well, it's a guild made up entirely of Dragon Slayers, but not just your regular old Dragon Slayers. These are 5th generation Dragon Slayers. Yes, you heard that correctly. We're now up to the 5th generation of Dragon Slayers, and this one is the worst because they literally eat dragons. Like, that's it. They just straight up consume dragons to get their powers. I don't really know how to feel about this, other than disgusted, because why is this the way that they get their magic? I don't know. I mean, are dragons even edible? No idea. But what makes this worse is that they're also willing to eat dragon slayers, which means that they're cannibals, basically. So, again, I think they're the worst of the generations so far, and it's not even close. But okay, that's just the mechanic of this generation of Dragon Slayers. Let's talk about the actual Dragon Slayers themselves. So let's start off with the first 3 that get introduced, and those are Scullion Raider, the Ash Dragon Slayer, Kyria, the Blade Dragon Slayer, and Mad Mole, the Armor Dragon Slayer. And first of all, what are these powers? Like, what? Do dragons have such specific powers? Like, is there a dragon for every type of magic you can think of? I guess. It's a little weird, but sure. I'll bite. Maybe they'll be very interesting. And they mostly play a role in the first 6 volumes. More so for the first 3, but yeah. I'm not really a big fan of any of them, because their powers just feel like they're very gimmicky. But then once you figure out the gimmick, they don't seem all that threatening. But before you figure out the gimmick, they almost seem invincible. So they're a weird mix. And if this was all they did, really they wouldn't leave much of an impression. You know, like, it would be the classic antagonist that shows up, gives our heroes a bit of trouble at first, then they figure out how to beat them, and they just dispose of them easily. However, they're actually more involved in the plot than just random antagonists that you meet the one time. And that especially goes for Kyria, whose treatment of Erza had me a little upset, let's just say. Yes, in case you couldn't tell from that poster back there, and both my YouTube channel banner art and the icon that appears next to my name, Erza is actually my favorite character in the entire show. So when I saw Kyria literally use her blade magic to cut her willpower and basically make her a slave for the better part of a day, I was literally fuming. No, you don't understand. I was actually furious. Again, one of Fairy Tail's best qualities is that they really get you to care about their characters. And when one of those characters is in pain or trouble, you're usually pretty upset. And when that character is your favorite, you're really upset. And when that character is made into an actual slave, you're beyond upset because this is an outrage. Seriously, that half of a manga volume where Erza was just being paraded around like a dog by Kiria was the maddest I've ever been while reading any manga. The one good thing here, though, is that after Erza inevitably breaks free of the spell, thanks in part to her magic eye, she lays the ever-leaving beatdown on Kiria, and it is very satisfying to see, because literally there has never been a character in Fairy Tail that I disliked more than Kiria in those 60 pages or whatever, and seeing her get the absolute crap slapped out of her was fantastic. So I guess that technically means that Kiria was a good antagonist because I really wanted to see her get completely destroyed. But it still doesn't excuse those first 60 pages or whatever of Volume 2. And because of that, she's still going into my least favorite villain piles in all of Fairy Tail. What about the other two I hear you saying? Well, they're a lot less interesting, honestly. They're more of the standard, oh, we're really strong because we can negate your magic in this way or another. And then when you figure out how to negate the negation of your magic from their magic, they're kind of really easy to beat. So, yeah, they're just clearly there to set up the guild as an antagonist / potential just villain for Fairy Tail, and not much else. I mean, I guess Scullion Raider was a bit more interesting than Mad Mole, and that's only because his powers are more unique. I mean, he can turn anything into ash, apparently, which included Natsu's flames. Still doesn't make sense to me, like how does ash stop fire, whatever. But it did make it so that you had to be like, oh, well, we can't beat him with physical attacks, so we have to use something that disperses the ashes, which actually made Wendy's wind magic a very good counter, and was just an interesting way to show how Fairy Tail is strongest when they work together, as opposed to just, oh, we have more power, and that's why we win. Mad Mole, on the other hand, like I said, he's definitely the least interesting. Mad Mole, on the other hand, is definitely the least interesting. Mad Mole, on the other hand, is definitely the least interesting out of any. Mad Mole, on the other hand, is definitely the least interesting. Mad Mole, on the other hand, is definitely the least interesting out of any of the Diablos members. Mad Mole, on the other hand, is definitely the least interesting out of any of the Diablos members. And that's because his whole power is, oh, I can make myself really hard to hurt because I have the armor dragon powers. So you can't beat me. I am... Of course, you then find out that's not really the case. And Natsu can just overpower his defense with his raw offensive power. So, yeah, again, he's the least interesting one. But also the one that made me the least upset. So, But those are the first three that get introduced. There's actually more that we know of as of now in the manga. And those include the Guild Master, who we haven't really seen too much of. And really all we can infer is that he kind of seems like Sabretooth's first Guild Master when we meet them, in that he's the worst. Then we have the Dark Dragon Slayer Knights. And those are like the elite troops, but we only meet one of them really, and that's towards the end of these 9 volumes. So what we're left with is 2 more normal 5th generation Dragon Slayers, and those are Nebaru and Rafe. So Nebaru is another one that's not super interesting in and of himself. His magic is weird though. He has clinging Dragon Slayer magic. Yeah, some of these Dragon Slayer magics are getting really weird. But basically, all they mean by that is that he has Dragon Slayer magic that uses spider webs, basically. I mean, that's the best way to describe it, I think. Really, if it wasn't for the fact that we see him use Dragon Force, and we see what effect it has on the 5th generation Dragon Slayers, basically turning them into savage beasts, he would be not relevant at all for the plot because he doesn't really accomplish a whole lot. That's of note, at least. And he gets taken out by Wendy pretty easily before he goes into the Dragon Force. Now, of course, when he goes into Dragon Force, a whole other plot point gets introduced, but before then, yeah, he's just kind of there. And before we go on to Rafe, let's talk about that plot point. And that is that it actually is revealed that because of Irene taking over Wendy's body in the Alvarez arc, she's actually still somewhere in her subconscious and can both help her out in battle and give her some of her power, even though it's just for the one time. And it actually takes using Irene's power to beat Nebaru using Dragon Force. Which is a little terrifying, because if you remember Irene, she was literally reshaping reality. And so the fact that it takes someone of her caliber to beat just a random dude of the Diablos Guild using Dragon Force, yeah, that's a little concerning. The one thing I will say, though, is that, again, when they use Dragon Force, they go into this very animalistic rage where they don't control themselves anymore. So they do seem very reluctant to go into that. But if they do, they are very strong. And I'm very curious to see how exactly they're going to have Fairy Tail deal with that. Because there's no way that Nebaru is the only one using Dragon Force out of the Diablos Guild for the rest of the arc. Now, finally, we get to my favorite of the Diablos Guild members. Not that was hard to do. And that is Rafe, who uses Spirit Dragon Slayer magic. And basically that means that unless you yourself go into your spirit form, as we see Natsu do in this volume, you can't really hit him, and you can't really hurt him, but he can still hit and hurt you. And he can also take over random people's bodies. Anyway, the battle with Rafe is actually very interesting for two reasons. One, Natsu is on the verge of dying, or at least on the verge of having his spirit being eaten by Rafe, which would kill him. And he only gets saved by his own subconscious in a weird way, where he sees both Zeref and Mavis, who in his mind have kids, which I actually kind of love, because I always really dug the relationship between Zeref and Mavis, you know, them being both foils of each other and just direct mirrors of one another. Actually, foils and mirrors of each other means the same thing. So what I wanted to say was that they're also very similar. There you go. But anyway, he sees them in his mind with their two kids, and then he also sees Igneel, and through everyone in his mind, even though it's basically stated that they're not really there. I mean, they are there, but it's not like they have powers there. They're just there in spirit, I guess. Anyway, whether their spirit is really there or not, or it's just him imagining them, doesn't really matter. Thanks to this subconscious event, he's now able to take control of his own spirit and escape Rafe's grasp, and then also beat Rafe as a spirit. This is also interesting because in later parts of the arc, we get spirit art, which is basically some sort of spirit magic as a prevalent way of using magic, which doesn't use the normal Eternanos that everyone else uses. So I don't know if that means that at some point Natsu, who has been exposed to using his spirit, will be able to combat with that more effectively. But so far that hasn't been the case, so I don't really know if they're just completely separate types of spirit magic or what. But the second reason that Rafe is very interesting is that we find out that before dying, because yeah, he's dead, he's just kind of a ghost, that's why he uses spirit magic, he was in Fairy Tail. And in fact, we see that when he tries to take over Makarov's body, which I'm guessing he's only able to do because he was already under the control of the White Mage. But again, we don't know too much about how he operates. He starts to have some of his memories come back and realizes that he in fact was a Fairy Tail wizard. And everyone in Fairy Tail really cared about him, which kind of gives him like peace of mind and makes him finally able to rest. And therefore he stops being a spirit and I guess fully dies. I don't know, however I'm going to see it, he just is no longer in the physical world in any way, shape, or form. This was pretty interesting, mostly because anytime you see someone having a connection to Fairy Tail, it's always fun to see how, especially since it showed us more of Makarov as a young man, which is always fun to see because he was both so similar and so different from how he is now. But other than that, yeah, there's nothing else to really talk about with Rafe. He's more there to show you that, yes, even some of the people in Diablos can be redeemable. Although maybe it's just him. The other ones normally seem to have a lot of hope for redemption. Finally, we come to the last of the Diablos members that we know of so far, and that is Suzaku, who is one of the Dark Dragonslayer Knights, which is basically their equivalent of S-Class wizards, as far as I can tell, or at least they're the elite wizards, so whatever you want to take that as. And he is interesting, and by that I mean I'm very conflicted about how I feel about this character. On the one hand, he's actually very cool. He's really strong, and he's also laid back, and he's very much just right down to business, because when he gets a mission, he just goes out there, completes it, and then returns. He's actually very similar in this way to the Zoldyck family in Hunter x Hunter, where they'll get a target to assassinate, they'll go and assassinate them, and then they'll just return like nothing happened. On the other hand, though, he just one-shots Erza somehow. Like, literally, it takes one slash of his sword, which both breaks Erza's sword, who, by the way, is the only one who can react to him because he's just that fast, and stabs through her. So, like, I get that they want to make him really strong, but how are they supposed to deal with this if not with some weird power-up? I don't know. It just feels like when he's not even set up as the main bad guy of the arc, like, what are they going to do by the end of this? I mean, I know that we've already had crazy antagonists before, like Zaref was ludicrously strong, and of course I already mentioned Irene, and a lot of the Spriggan 12 were very strong as well, but I don't know, something about the way he just completely destroys Erza without any difficulty apparently kind of rubs me the wrong way, both because A, it's Erza and again she's my favorite, and B, because I can see this leading to some very weird power buff that comes out of nowhere. Because again, without that, I don't really know how they're supposed to beat him. What's worse is that he's not the only Dark Dragon Slayer Knight, so we can only assume the other ones are just as strong. And if they ever decide to go into Dragon Force, like, seriously, like, I don't even know who's supposed to beat them at that point. Like, could Makarov beat them? And this is a hypothetical scenario where Makarov doesn't have any of the injuries that he sustained from the battle against the Alvarez Empire. So, yeah, like, seriously, I have no idea how strong this guy will end up being, or the Dark Dragon Slayer Knights in general, but I'm a little concerned because it seems like they're too strong. Like, seriously, I think all the main character had an easier time battling against Alderon's different forms than Erza did battling this guy, and it's not even close. And now, yes, Alderon's forms kind of split his power up, but they also made it so that whenever one of the forms went down, the main body of Alderon that Natsu was facing grew weaker. So again, I don't know, he seems a little obscene in terms of his power, and I just don't want it to be a thing where it's like, well, we have to pull this Deus Ex Machina thing out of nowhere because otherwise you can't beat him. Having said that, I'm guessing that Natsu's more savage form that we saw him going into after eating Igneous Flames will probably play a factor into beating not just Suzaku but the Diabolos Guild in general. But again, I'm not really sure. So basically, if they handle this plotline well, and they give a good reason as to how or why Fairy Tail's members can now deal with the Dark Dragon Slayer Knights, I have no issues with this. But if they go the, let's call it Dragon Ball Super route, where they just give the main characters buffs just for the sake of giving them buffs, yeah, I'm not gonna be too happy. And before you comment something like, oh, we've already had random power-up buffs in Fairy Tail before, yes, but they usually had an interesting lore behind them, or at least some kind of interesting mechanic that didn't make it feel like it's just, oh, you know, now they're just stronger just because they're stronger and that's all there is to it. Anyway, I spent a lot of time on this last point, especially since this was mostly about Suzaku and I didn't even talk too much about him. But again, I think since we haven't seen too much of him yet, the main comment I can make about him is the impact that he and all of the other Dark Dragon Slayer Knights will have on the rest of the story. And that is it for my video on the Diabolos Guild. Now, of course, this is going into a bit of the topics that I will be discussing in my reviews of volumes 4 through 6 and 7 through 9. But I thought it was good to make a separate video about this because they're not fully integrated with the main plotline yet. So it's hard to go into detail with them during the reviews of the volumes. But they're also being set up to be one of the main antagonists. So it doesn't feel right to just not talk about them. Anyway, that will do it for us here today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more Fairy Tail content, whether it be related to the 100 Years Quest or just Fairy Tail content in general, and then I do recommend subscribing as I'm going to be covering all of that in the near future. And I hope you have a great day. And also, I hope to see you in the next video. But until then, remember to follow the way of the ace. See ya!